Hello, fellow travelers. My name is Martin Desmond. Despite the clickbait title, I am not going to make any rash judgments about the possible incompetence on the Dragon Bravo fire that burned down Grand Canyon Lodge on July 12th. However, I will make a categorical statement that the cruel Trump administration has displayed extraordinary levels of incompetence on many of its other actions. What we do know about the Trump and Doge administration is that more than 5,500 Park Service jobs, one third of its workforce, is on the chopping block. The Trump administration is proposing to slash the National Park Service's FY 2026 budget by 40% from 3.2 billion to 1.8 billion. I doubt that President Trump has ever visited any of our precious national parks in the West. During his first administration, he pronounced Yosemite as Yosemite, which tells me that he had no idea about one of our nation's most treasured parks. So, if you're a Trump supporter, you will probably get pretty frustrated listening to this video. In June of 2024, my spouse was having too much fun listening to Cajun music in Louisiana, so we were driving her back to our music desert in Newport, Oregon, so she could complain for 2,500 miles why there wasn't any good live music in our town. In previous years, we had visited the south rim of the Grand Canyon. This time we decided to visit the North Rim and spend the night at the Grand Canyon Lodge. The North Rim only gets 10% of the crowds that the South Rim receives. However, due to the higher elevation of the North Rim and the staggering views from the Grand Canyon Lodge, the North Rim has certainly become my favorite of the two rims. Back in the good old days, when I was much younger and more intelligent, I had worked for many years on Forest Service and Park Service hot shot and engine crews. In 1982, the Park Service screwed up and hired me to work on the Bison hot shot crew. We had 4 inches of snow on the 4th of July that summer and did not go to any fires in the park itself. 6 years later, in 1988, wildfires would burn over one third of the park, totaling over 800,000 acres. Before we get back to the Dragon Bravo fire that burned down Grand Canyon Lodge, this was not the first fire that had burned down a lodge on the North Rim. Designed by Gilbert Stanley Underwood and completed in 1928, the original rustic lodge was largely constructed from logs and native stone, making it both picturesque and highly flammable. On the night of September 1st, 1932, the original Grand Canyon Lodge burned completely to the ground. And here's the hard truth: this wasn't just an accident, it was a tragedy made worse by human error, poor planning, and incompetence. The fire likely started in the kitchen, probably a grease fire. That alone should have been manageable, but the lodge was made entirely of dry timber. No sprinklers, no hydrants, not even a basic fire suppression system. Guests and lodge staff tried to stop the flames with buckets and garden hose in the massive wooden structure. With no trained firefighters, no emergency plan, and no meaningful equipment, they never had a chance. The fire raced through the building, and by sunrise, the crown jewel of the North Rim was a smoking ruin. There was no formal investigation blaming anyone, but unofficial reports pointed to negligence, grease buildup in the kitchen, lack of maintenance, and a total absence of fire precautions. It was a preventable disaster. The ruins sat empty during the Great Depression, and it wasn't until 1937 that a new fire resistant lodge was built. So here we are, nearly 100 years later, wondering if the Trump administration had failed to prepare for the obvious in its rush to eliminate so-called waste, fraud, and abuse. Here are the current facts about the Dragon Bravo fire. It started on July 4th with a lightning strike deep in the forested north rim of the Grand Canyon. Officials named it the Dragon Bravo fire, and at first it was being managed as a controlled burn. The strategy: confine and contain. Let it play out naturally. Minimal interference. But by July 11th and 12th, the fire had other plans. Fueled by dry conditions and winds gusting up to 40 miles per hour, the fire exploded across the North Rim. What was once a manageable burn became a fast moving inferno, and by the time it was over, the historic Grand Canyon Lodge was gone and up to 70 other structures. And the questions are already piling up. Why wasn't full suppression the immediate response? Certainly, fire managers must be aware that a confine and contain policy is questionable during the summer months. However, the Park Service had apparently had a confine and contain fire 3 years earlier with a similar name as the Dragon Fire in 2022 that did not cause any serious problems at that time. However, with this fire, Arizona governor had some pretty strong words. She said, "An incident of this magnitude demands intense oversight and scrutiny into the federal government's emergency response." She noted they must first take aggressive action to end the wildfire and prevent further damage, but Arizonans deserve answers for how this fire was allowed to decimate the Grand Canyon National Park. While the flame was started with a lightning strike, the federal government chose to manage that fire as a controlled burn during the driest and hottest part of the Arizona summer. I would also like to point out that firefighters very courageously protected Old Faithful Inn and Old Faithful Lodge back in 1988 when there were over 800,000 acres that burned through the park. My firefighters could not protect Grand Canyon Lodge from a much smaller wildfire, less than 5,000 acres. One wonders why the federal government did not prep any of the North Rim facilities. There are questions that need to be addressed, although I don't have much faith that the current Trump administration will engage in such a proper review. As I mentioned at the start of the video, I'm not going to make any rash judgments at the present time. However, I'm going to continue to research and find out more information about what happened. I will be making future videos on the burning down of Grand Canyon Lodge, so I would encourage you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for listening to this video to the end.